I'm now moving to the second part of my presentation, and that will be why is it that public financial management is so critical to address climate change. So, as always, the reason why it's so critical is because of the money. And it is true that addressing climate change is going to be extremely costly. There was an IMF study recently in 2019 that shows that compliance with just the 2015 Paris Agreement would reduce global income by more than 1% by 2100. So that's a lot of money, 1% of global GDP. The other thing is that one can expect with all these systems that variability increases with the average. Then the loss could double, actually. And therefore, that there is an issue not only of looking at the way the PFM system will react statically, if I may say, but also to look at risk management in a much deeper way than what has been done so far. The other thing is that if we want to have a chance, simply, I think, there will be a need to improve the efficiency of the delivery of public goods. Global infrastructure will need to be increased substantially above pre-pandemic levels by $3 to $3.8 trillion. That is 2 to 3% of GDP per annum over the next 10 years, just to ensure a green recovery. The natural disasters also cost a lot, about 18 billion a year in low and middle income countries through direct damages to infrastructure assets. There is also the question of service disruption, and the World Bank estimates that we talk about half a trillion US dollars. So we talk about big money, which means one has to be careful the way we spend the money, but even what we're already spending, we should improve the efficiency of that. Is there room to do that is actually the question. So there will be an important need, we just saw that, to increase the level of public investment, and that is going to happen in a context where most of the money that may ever come in the future is already earmarked for various things. There's a book by Heller, I'll give you the reference of the presentation, in 2009 that basically says the commitments are such that probably countries have never been in a situation where they have already committed all the resources that are going to come in the future. So that's a problem, because we have tightened ourselves our belt in a way that we cannot really face the music that is coming, I say. The other thing is that the money is not well spent. There was a study by Schwartz and all at the IMF that says that countries lose a lot of money, 1/3 of the resources basically, to inefficiencies in the way they spend on public investment. So that's quite a bit. The last one is a tricky one too, because the amounts of money that are required are so large that actually there will be a need to involve the private sector with the public sector. And that will take the form of instruments, special instruments they are called, but like what people know is PPP, public-private partnerships. These are contracts between the private sector and the public sector, and it's not always clear. Some PPPs work, some others don't work. And it's not always clear that the authorities, especially in less advanced countries, are really ready to face the big lawyers of big private firms that propose the public-private partnership. So there is a lot there that will depend on PFM, a good PFM system. So with that in mind, a new concept was introduced, that's green PFM. Basically, the idea was to adapt existing PFM practices to better support climate-sensitive policies. It's not a new PFM approach. That's what some people say, you know, I have something new. It's called green PFM. But it's more an adaptation, an improvement of the existing practice to target these improvements to what is specific to climate-sensitive policies in the PFM system. So the first thing is that there is no one-size-fits-all approach to green PFM. All the countries in the world are at various stages of advancement. They are strong with pillar number 2, but weak in pillar number 3. Or there are things like that all over the world. All the countries, especially in less advanced countries, do not have PFM systems that are really working. So essentially, you cannot really compare a less advanced economy to a big economy like France, for example, where basically the PFM system works much better. Even there are issues because when the Court of Audit reviewed in France, reviewed the achievements of or how well the government had taken care of green concerns in the budget, and was not all good. So a major issue is that the basic functions of the PFM system, I mentioned financial integrity, making sure that the money is collected nicely and we know where it's going. Even that is not fulfilled in many countries, actually. And you can even see when you look at the PFA, the instrument that I mentioned, you can see that some countries are getting better and better scores, and they sort of drag the scale with them, and less advanced countries are there at the bottom and they are not moving much. So that is an issue because the specifics of green PFM that would be required would impose really a big burden on PFM systems that are not sophisticated. So sophisticated systems can probably take care of many things. For not so advanced countries, it will be a challenge. So what are some of the specifics of green PFM system? And I'm not talking here about the budget cycle because there are some there. But some of the things that you may want to think about, and it doesn't necessarily come to mind. One is the taxes. So we are thinking of Pigouvian tax system, Pigouvian after Pigou, the French scholar. A tax system that would be such that you tax the goods according to their real cost, including the cost to the environment. That means that plane tickets, for example, would have to jump a great deal, jump up the price, would have to be increased substantially. But central banks and regulators are also concerned because banks lend money for properties. These properties can be harmed by any climate change in general, and we saw the numbers that were compiled by the World Bank on that. So for the central banks who are in charge of basically supervising, or supervisors outside the central bank, if that's the arrangement, but they need to look at the bank and say, do they have a balance sheet by which they can actually absorb things? If a couple of properties go down, that would be fine. But if a whole city starts being threatened by the sea advancing, for example, well, the bank is in problems and has problems, and that's a problem, therefore, for central banks or for regulators. The other thing is procurement. There is a debate. I just mentioned this here because some think that the procurement system should actually be changed to take into account the environment concerns. That means when you buy something, you have to make sure that what you buy actually respects the environment and will not impose an excessive burden. To which the procurement specialists answer that, well, we know how to buy a table, we're experts in that, but if we start to do all these calculations to find out whether it affects the government or not, that will be complicated. That's not for us. And many people think that indeed it's not for them. But it's not clear that, and the debate is there. The debate is there. There is no straight answer, but there would be other ways to procure things and respect the environment without imposing a burden on procurement specialists. So if I now talk about the green budget cycle and I look at I was talking about outside the budget cycle, now I look at the budget cycle. One thing would be the strategic planning and the fiscal framework. That's the first pillar, really. The medium-term financial framework would need to integrate all sorts of aspects of the environment. That's where all countries do well. It's quite easy to get technical assistance in that area. It's sort of noble, so the donor countries are quite happy to do that, and people like to work in that area. So you have a beautiful strategic planning and fiscal framework within which your budget can be actually computed. That's one thing. But when it comes to budget preparation and how well the Ministry of Finance can communicate the objectives, the constraints, and what it wants in terms of strategy to the line ministries that are going to spend, that's another matter. And we find that there the countries are a little bit less prepared, maybe. When we come to budget executions, I mean, do they know where the money goes? Do they track it? Do they use the information to change, to stir things a bit differently? And you may expect that you will need to do that, because if there is a climate catastrophic event that takes place, well, maybe money needs to go there, and you need to be aware of it and all that. The World Bank reports I have seen and other donors' reports actually say that there are very few. Sometimes the information comes back, not always, sometimes, but even when it comes back, it's seldom used. So basically, the third part is a complex affair, and it's already working a bit less than strategic planning. In terms of control and audit, that's also complicated. The courts of audit are trying to do what they can. If you want to have internal audits within the ministry to find out whether things are going well, at least you need to decide the objectives really well. It's not always the case. And the other thing is that in all cases, you would actually like to have a regulatory impact assessments. When you have a policy, you want to know what that policy will have as an impact on the economy. From what I have seen and what the World Bank has seen too, there is a lot of enthusiasm for RIAs at the beginning, and that enthusiasm fades away very soon. So basically, that is a problem. And so you see, number one is doing well, and then it goes down as we go down the pillars. So, okay, so there are a couple of important issues here I need to talk about, because I mean, people don't think about these. One is tagging. Tagging is basically a way to know where the money goes. Public economists, they will tell you that actually tagging is not really practical because money is fungible. If you go to the private sector, they say that if you are a company and you go to the stock market to try to get some funds, to raise funds, you'd better come with, this is what that money is going to be used exactly. This is what it's going to be used for. If you don't do that, you will not get your money. And so here you need tagging. And the practice is now 10 years old. It has been reviewed. It's not always satisfactory. There are some review markers that allow you to actually do some form of tagging that would be accepted around the world, but the results are sort of not clear. You need tagging also because if you want to levy money for green bonds, you need to say, well, that money is going there. And the review for green bonds is not, those who have reviewed that are not exactly enthusiastic. But still, some form of tagging is important because in all cases, you want to know what the money is going to be used for. And that is a difficult affair. As I just told you, the systems that allow the information to come back to the Ministry of Finance are not always good. And then you need anyway to have the Ministry of Finance that actually does something. The other thing is the state-owned enterprises. We always forget them because they are a bit at arm's length way of the central government. But if you think of electricity, water, sewerage, all these things are usually in the hands of public companies, and essentially they will be at the front of the fight to sort of to fight climate change, essentially. The good thing, though, is that the state-owned enterprises are enterprises, and so closer to the market, and maybe they are a good place to start to have green bonds. Subnational governments also tend to be forgotten, but the UNDP says that 50 to 80% of adaptation and mitigation actions should be linked to subnational governments. And there you have to think of, a city that is near the coast, and that would be eaten up by the sea advancing, or others, or big cities, actually, that are so big in many African countries. The capital is a huge place. And think of Nairobi in Kenya. Actually, there is a lot there. And there are local authorities that are very concerned by what is happening in terms of climate. It's not the central government, it's the subnational government. So basically, subnational governments are important. If you look at the PIFA numbers about how well we know stuff about the subnational governments, how well they are monitored by the central government, we find that it's usually not good. There is a nice summary here from the IMF, a framework of green public financial management. So here, concerned with green public financial management in general, there are also instruments that look more at issues related to public investment. So are there instruments to assess green PFM systems? I can think of three. The PIFA climate, that's the PIFA with a few added questions, indicators that are directly related to green issues. Climate PIMA, that's more an IMF instrument that is focused on the management of green infrastructure. And then there is this map that looks at public procurement systems. I have already, it's sponsored also by the EU, that one. And essentially, it's a methodology to assess the procurement system. I told you what the debate there is about that, and it's a real. So what should be done? Green challenges are extremely important. I have given you the numbers. I think it's quite clear. So PFM systems must be upgraded now. The basic functions of PFM systems in most countries are actually not that great. So there is quite a bit to be done, but fixing the basics should be a priority. It should not be the only priority. However, you cannot just manage a poor system to try to improve it. You also need to pull the whole system up, and therefore you need to look at a reform program that is well thought through and has a chance to go. And to have a chance to go, probably the good idea is to start with the Ministry of Finance, and then a few pilot ministries that are particularly concerned, could be health, for example, education, whatever, and go from there. International experience, I told you, suggests that the first stages of the budget cycle are better taken care of than the later one. Using feedback when you have feedback on what is happening on the ground would be very nice, but it's not done in many places. Of course, the climate change challenges will increase the need for the private sector because the money is so big, and that too requires preparedness, if you wish. And then there is a question of the procurement process. I have listed here a bunch of references that you may find useful. I draw your attention on this Heller book that basically says that it will be difficult to find more money anywhere. And then there are other references that are really useful. And I would like to thank you for allowing me to speak about a topic that is dear to me. Thank you very much.